calls for a grand jury. The Russia investigation marches on while Attorney General Jeff Sessions targets leakers. Heading out of town. As President Trump leaves Washington for a 2-week vacation, we'll look at some of the places our presidents have used as retreats, including President Lincoln. Concerns in Venezuela. The Vatican's message on what it calls the radicalization in the South American country. And the Pope's choir. An inside look as the group prepares to tour 3 U.S. cities. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, August 4th, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The investigation into possible links between the Trump campaign and Russia enters new terrain, a grand jury. President Trump says he wants a truly honest outcome to the Russia investigation. This comes as Attorney General Jeff Sessions focuses on getting tough on the leakers. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us from Capitol Hill with the details. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Grand juries are standard in criminal investigations. It doesn't mean any charges will actually come. A lot of the reporting on this Russian story has come from leaks, and tonight Attorney General Jeff Sessions has a big warning for people he calls rogue anonymous sources.
We are taking a stand. This culture of leaking must stop.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions says leaks spiked dramatically in recent months, a tripling in the number of active leak investigations compared to the end of the Obama administration. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates issues his own warning.
If you improperly disclose classified information, we will find you.
This comes after the drip of leaks about the Trump campaign and White House. President Trump says the growing story about the Russian investigation is just a Democratic diversion.
There were no Russians in our campaign. There never were. We didn't win because of Russia. We won because of you.
But special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia takes a new step. Based on an anonymous source, the AP confirms Mueller is enlisting a grand jury. Presidential aides shrug it off today.
The president has said that Jim Comey, the former FBI director, assured him on 3 separate occasions that he is not personally a target of any investigation.
But what if President Trump wanted to fire the investigator? 2 bipartisan Senate bills just introduced would shield special counselors.
I personally believe the Obama administration destroyed some of the good reputation that we had in the Department of Justice and in the FBI. So this is an opportunity to show to the American people we're serious about independence, we're serious about being held to a high standard.
Trump attorney Jay Sekulow told Fox News the president is not thinking of firing Robert Mueller. He says a grand jury is just standard operating procedure. Now, White House attorney Ty Cobb says they support anything that can speed up the conclusion of Mueller's work. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thanks, Jason. Since President Trump took office in January, the U.S. has added more than 1 million jobs. The Labor Department released its monthly figures showing the U.S. economy gained 209,000 jobs in July. The unemployment rate fell to 4.3%, matching a 16-year low. In response to the report, the president tweeted, "Excellent job numbers just released, and I have only just begun." The governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice, announces he's going back to the Republican Party. The big announcement came during President Trump's rally in front of thousands of supporters in Huntington, West Virginia. To break down the political news of the week, we welcome in Philip Wegman, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. So, Philip, last night in front of a large crowd, President Trump said having Jim on board the Republican Party now is such an honor. What are the implications for both parties?
Well, last night, President Trump spilled some red ink in West Virginia, but it's not clear what this actually does to change the political parameters. Remember, Governor Justice, he's identifying as a Republican now, but before he identified also as an independent, and he only switched to become a Democrat to run for governor in 2015. The really interesting question I see here is if this puts any pressure on Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat moderate in that state, as he moves into the 2018 midterm elections.
Earlier in our report, Jason Calvi explained, I want to switch gears now to the Russia probe. It's still a serious issue for Washington. Do you think President Trump and his administration is taking the Russian probe seriously enough? Are they doing what they need to?
Well, they certainly need to be taking it seriously. It's on headline news every single day. The president says that he wants to cooperate with this investigation, and the best way for him to do that is to get serious about Russia, like the Congress did with the president's signature not long ago when they passed those sessions. The one thing that the White House does need to do is they need to get on the same page with Congress. The other day, we had Vice President Pence in Russia's front yard saying that he was speaking with one voice with Congress about those penalties on Russia, and then you had President Trump blaming Congress for a very poor relationship with the Kremlin. So they need to get on the same message and then let the grand jury investigation run its course.
And speaking of this administration trying to get on the same page, let's talk about Mick Mulvaney, the White House budget director, because this past week he said that the Senate shouldn't give up on health care. Now that's a contentious issue, and the question is, do you think that he should have weighed in or mentioned that, or should he be sticking more to the budget and what he was thinking about talking about?
Well, look, Mick Mulvaney is a numbers guy. He's a smart conservative who was in the House and has made a great transition over to the Office of Business and Management. This is the guy who's responsible for balancing the books. And we've heard that healthcare is anemic. We've heard that it's on life support. We've even heard that it's dead. But the fact that Mick Mulvaney is saying that the Senate shouldn't remove their gaze from that issue shows that the White House is still very concerned about this. Remember, this is one of President Trump's big 3 campaign promises, so I think that there's more work to be done here, and this is an indication that Trump isn't ready to let this one go. Yeah,
and obviously healthcare is going to be something they're going to continue to talk about for months. Philip Wegman, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Today, President Trump joins the annual August exodus from the city he calls the Swamp. It's his first extended vacation from Washington since taking office. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump's departure is somewhat out of necessity as workers make structural repairs to the White House. Trump spends the next 16 days at his resort in New Jersey. It's the latest on a list of places U.S. presidents have used as retreats throughout our nation's history.
JFK had Hyannisport. George Bush 41 had Kennebunkport. Obama had Hawaii. President Trump is going back to Bedminster. Trump criticized former President Obama for taking too much time away, tweeting in August of 2011, "Barack Obama played golf yesterday. Now he heads to a 10-day vacation in Martha's Vineyard. Nice work ethic." And blasted GOP senators for not passing a new health care bill. The president recently challenged Congress to delay their August recess.
And we shouldn't leave town until this is complete, until this bill is on my desk.
But a vacation may be just what Trump himself needs to keep up with the work that comes with the presidency.
I think presidents need to go on vacation. They need to take a break. They need to get away.
Ken Walsh is a former White House reporter who has written a book on presidents and their retreats.
President Clinton told me that, and his staff told me that the worst decisions he made came when he was tired and after he refused to take a break.
Many presidents have benefited from a change of scenery.
3 miles north of the White House, this cottage is where President Lincoln would go to get away. He actually lived here a fourth of his presidency, and it was here that he developed the Emancipation Proclamation. His last visit was the day before his assassination.
Erin Carlson Mast is the CEO of Lincoln's Cottage. She tells me moving to the cottage brought President Lincoln closer to the sufferings of the Civil War. He and the First Lady lived just yards from where burials were taking place at National Cemetery.
For Lincoln, it was important to get outside of the bubble of the White House. His commute, daily commute, between here and the White House put him into contact with caravans of wounded soldiers who were coming back from the front lines.
As for President Trump, Ken Walsh says this trip provides an opportunity for Americans to see a more human side of the commander-in-chief.
When presidents go away on break or when they get away from Washington, sometimes they let their guard down a lot. It could really help Trump, I think, if we saw more of a softer image of him.
When President Trump visited Bedminster in November, shortly after winning the election, he and Vice President Pence went to a Sunday service at a local Presbyterian church. No details have been released on the president's plans for this trip. Wyatt?
Mark, can you tell us more about the upcoming White House repairs?
While President Trump is away, West Wing staff will be temporarily relocated next door to the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Repairs include replacing the 27-year-old air conditioning system and the south portico steps. There will also be renovations to the Navy mess kitchen and the West Wing lower lobby.
No rest for the weary, at least for that White House staff. Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thanks so much, Mark. For the second time this week, a Taliban suicide bomber hits a NATO patrol in Afghanistan. One service member from the country of Georgia and 2 civilians died in last night's attack. The bomber concealed his explosives beneath a burqa and rammed a motorcycle into the convoy. Police in Dubai reopened the streets around one of the world's tallest residential skyscrapers after firefighters put out a blaze early this morning. No major injuries were reported. Investigators are now looking at what started the fire inside the 86-story building named the Torch Tower. In Venezuela, the controversial assembly charged with rewriting the country's constitution gets to work. Delegates marched to the meeting with hundreds of government supporters. The assembly is charged with rewriting a 1999 constitution and has been given sweeping powers over other branches of government. The actions by President Nicolas Maduro has led to months of violent protests and rising tensions. The Vatican expresses its deepest concern for the radicalization of the crisis in Venezuela. In a statement released today, the Vatican asked political figures for the full respect of human rights. Our partners at Catholic News Agency have even written more on the Vatican statement. You can read the full coverage now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The American media is still talking about an article in a journal approved by the Vatican. It says conservative American Catholics forged an alliance of hate with evangelical Christians to support President Donald Trump. The authors call their partnership on issues such as abortion and marriage strange and says they promote, quote, an ecumenism of conflict. Kishore Jayabalan, director of the Acton Institute's Rome office, joins us now. Before Acton, he worked for the Vatican at the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. Kishore, this article is getting some backlash in the United States. Critics say it depicts Americans who are faithful to the church as fanatics who are creating division. Can you help us understand why there's that perception?
Well, that perception, I have to say, is a long-standing one. In the Vatican. I worked for 5 years in the Roman Curia, as you said, at the Council for Justice and Peace. And I was always a little bit taken aback by the, not just ignorance, but almost a type of anti-Americanism that's prevalent among curial officials. I don't think out of any kind of animus towards the United States. It derives it away from ignorance, but it really takes on a virulent form, especially I would say when there's a Republican administration, a conservative administration in the White House, and somehow there's a lack of understanding what, let's say, more orthodox or conservative evangelicals and Catholics want to achieve in the political arena. And I think that's what occasioned this article in Civiltà Cattolica and reaction that we've seen since then.
Now, we should say the Acton Institute is a conservative think tank that promotes free society characterized by individual liberty, sustained by religious principles. So, as an American Catholic and a political conservative, do you find yourself having to explain your views often to Italians?
Pretty much every day. It's a long, like I said, a long-standing problem. You see it especially when an election year takes place, and we're just after one here. And I'm always actually pleasantly surprised how much interest Italians have in American politics. They're always asking me who I think is going to win the presidential election, and there is a general interest and a positive one. There is a particular take, a particular look at American politics. I think the one inside the Vatican tends to be more left of center among the officials and the staff members, and I think it's just the way it's been for a long time.
On a personal note, Kishore, you were baptized and received into the Catholic Church by Pope John Paul II in Rome in 1996. Can you tell us about that experience and the impact St. John Paul has had on your life?
Sure. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, growing up a non-Catholic but in Catholic schools. And so I was a very big fan, not only of John Paul II, but Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. So when I got the chance to come to Rome and be baptized and confirmed and receive my first communion from John Paul II, I of course was extremely honored. It still doesn't seem real to me in a lot of ways, but a year later I started working for the Holy See at the UN in New York, and then was brought to Rome, and it was obviously the thrill of a lifetime.
Absolutely. Kishore Jayabalan, director of the Acton Institute's Rome office. Thanks so much for your perspective.
Thank you.
Coming up, what the international community needs to do to hold ISIS accountable for war crimes in the Middle East. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. This week's marked 3 years since ISIS attacked the small religious minority group, the Yazidis, in northern Iraq. Human rights activists are still working for justice following ISIS war crimes and crimes against humanity. To talk more about the plight of Yazidis in the region, we welcome in Pari Ibrahim. She's a lawyer and the executive director of the Free Yazidi Foundation, based in the Netherlands and operates in the region of Kurdistan. So Pari, you were born in Iraq. You moved to the Netherlands with your family when you were 3 years old, and you started the foundation in 2014. Tell me about what the foundation has done in just the 3 years to help the Yazidis.
Well, we initially started to do advocacy work to get recognition of genocide, because until now there's a genocide ongoing. We set up a children's center and women's center to help victims of ISIS sexual slavery and child soldiers to recover from the trauma. And the trauma in the community is immense. We try to hold ISIS perpetrators accountable for the crimes that they committed against the Yazidis.
How many Yazidis have been persecuted? How many died? Do you have any numbers?
We have numbers of more than 500,000 Yazidis were living in Sinjar. This is the area where they were attacked. Now more than 400,000 are IDPs in Kurdistan, North Iraq. And we have now more than 3,000 women and girls still in captivity. Those are the numbers that we have currently.
Sure, and you've been working with the government of Iraq and international groups as well to call attention to the genocide, specifically against the Yazidis. Tell me what your foundation is doing to get the ISIS operatives who have been captured held accountable and brought to trial.
So we started initially to go for the ICC, the International Criminal Court. We submitted a report to the prosecutor. Until now, we did only receive that they received the submission. We wanted them to start a preliminary investigation against the ISIS perpetrators, who are foreign fighters and members of the Rome Statute of member states. And until now, just the reaction that they received it, but nothing happened. So now we're trying to get indictments in countries, for example, Netherlands, Germany, America, all these countries, also in Europe, indictment for the crimes that they committed, instead of only terrorism, which is happening right now. Now we're 3 years further and still no indictment for the crimes that they committed against the Yazidis or other religious minorities.
It sounds so tough. How long of a process do you think that will take to really get a lot of them held accountable?
It will take a very long time, what we've seen in other genocidal attacks against other populations. But I think the Free Yazidi Foundation is making good steps towards justice, and we might have cases in the coming months. We already know even that some girls in Germany have seen their perpetrators as refugees, and those were ISIS fighters who were raping and killing Yazidi people.
Well, we wish you and your foundation the best of luck in all the work that you do. Pari Ibrahim, Executive Director of the Free Yazidi Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Tonight on EWTN ProLife Weekly, Catherine Zeltner looks at the U.S. Bishop's ministry called Project Rachel. It helps those suffering from emotional or spiritual pain after an abortion.
The groups were intimate, and I was amongst peers that were dealing with the same pain and grief that I was. And we were in that journey together. So knowing that I wasn't alone, and to learn how to forgive ourselves and knowing that God forgives us was amazing.
Teresa Hessler is now giving a voice to the voiceless after getting an abortion 2 years ago. To hear more of her story, watch Pro-Life Weekly tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern right here on EWTN. It will air again Sunday morning at 10. Up next, opioid crisis in America. We'll speak to one expert about his recommendations for the president to combat the epidemic. Plus, the Pope's choir prepares for its visit to the United States. We'll have a preview of the trip. The St For Parish Priest. Today the church remembers St. John Vianney, a priest known for his faith and help for the poor. In 1929, Pope Pius XI named him the patron of parish priests worldwide. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump's Drug Commission is asking the Commander-in-Chief to declare a national emergency to deal with America's opioid epidemic. Our next guest has outlined recommendations to the President's Commission to combat the crisis. We welcome in Dr. Anand Parekh to the program. He's the Chief Medical Advisor at the Bipartisan Policy Center and previously served as the Health and Human Services Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health. So do you believe, first off, that this is a national emergency?
It is an emergency in the sense that 30,000 Americans are dying each year because of opioids, and 2 million Americans are addicted to opioids. This is affecting rural Americans, urban Americans, rich and poor Americans, young and old Americans. So it really will take all of us together to really conquer this epidemic.
Now, you had put forth some recommendations to the commission. What kind of things did you specify?
So our Bipartisan Policy Center has a governor's council made up of former governors, and they really felt they needed to weigh in on this important topic. And they made 4 critical recommendations. The first, that we need to curb unnecessary prescriptions of opioids in this country. We prescribe way too many opioids for too long of a duration, for too high of a dose. Second, we need to curb illicit supply. So there is an illicit supply coming from Mexico in terms of heroin, synthetic opioids like fentanyl coming from China. We need to curb the illicit supply. Third, we need to treat Americans who have addiction, and unfortunately, out of the 2 million, only 10% of Americans are being treated. And fourth, we need to educate Americans about the state of this epidemic and raise the national consciousness. Those were the 4 critical recommendations.
And when one of those recommendations, talking about the drugs that are coming in from outside the country, it's interesting because Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced this week the Justice Department will be dispatching 12 federal prosecutors to cities focused exclusively on this issue. Can law enforcement, do you think, can really play an important role here?
Law enforcement can play an absolutely critical role in stemming the tide of illicit opioids that are coming in from overseas. The Customs and Border Protection in this country, they need the tools, the technology to identify shipments of illicit opioids coming in. What the Attorney General did this week also is focusing on those very few healthcare professionals out there who are illegally profiteering, perhaps, from opioids, these pill mills. And I think with that respect, that initiative could be very helpful. But it is important to remember why most healthcare professionals out there, it's not that they're illegally profiteering. They just need help, support, and education to make sure they're not unnecessarily prescribing opioids.
A lot of important steps, and it will take a while to do, but those sound like good recommendations. Dr. Anand Parekh, Chief Medical Advisor for the Bipartisan Policy Center, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you so much.
Finally tonight, a rare look at the Vatican's Sistine Chapel Choir, who's preparing for a trip to the United States for the first time in 30 years. The Pontifical Musical Chapel Sistine, or the Pope's Choir, sings surrounded by Michelangelo's masterpieces in the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican. The group is made up of 20 adults and 30 boys who not only performs in the Sistine Chapel, but also at Masses the Pope celebrates. The choir is preparing for its first visit to the United States in 30 years, with stops at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, the Basilica of the National Shrine in Washington, D.C., and for the first time, a stop in the Motor City with a performance at the Detroit Opera House.
New York, Washington, Detroit.
At the helm of the group since 2010 is Monsignor Massimo Palombella, who sifted through the Vatican archives, studying music manuscripts to return the choir to its early glory in the 16th century. Today, the group practices using a piano once belonging to Pope Benedict XVI, their voices raised as they sing a cappella. With less than 2 months left until the first performance, the world's oldest choir is excited for the trip.
It's wonderful to bring what we do in the extraordinary Sistine Chapel to the United States and to sing to the people of America. It'd be wonderful for us.
The choir will be performing in the U.S. in mid-September. EWTN will be filming the Washington, D.C. concert. Stay tuned for updates. In the meantime, you can learn more at SistineChapelUSTour.com. And we thank you for watching this week. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back here on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.